Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Pits of Motor Chaos. This is the host, Dave. I got online a special guest, Senior Vice President of Don Schumacher Racing, Mike Lewis. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing terrific. Thanks, Dave.
So, you enjoying your time off from drag racing?
People don't understand how busy this time of year is. To rebrand all 7 cars and all the backups and 18 trucks and trailers, it's really our busiest time of the year. And the people up and down the front office at Diaz are pretty frantic right now. It's a beautiful time to watch things come together and to see the new look of the cars and the fire suits and all that stuff. It's pretty frantic to get it all done, and the people that work around me all have their various accounts and responsibilities, and they're pretty frantic. But we're going to be ready by Pomona, and things will look great, and we'll be off to the races.
So now, Mike, your grandfather's the one that got you into drag racing?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And everybody has their story as to how they got involved in something, and it landed in my backyard. We had property across the street, belonged to my grandfather. A motorcycle club built a 2-lane dirt track. So that was my only exposure to drag racing. I knew sprint cars, big cars, stock cars, all that kind of stuff, but drag racing was foreign, and he built the track across the street. I was 12 years old, and the minute I loved all of the cars. The blown cars were pretty special, and then when I heard my first nitro car, man, I was hooked for life.
So you were 12 years old when your grandfather built Maple Grove Raceway?
Well, let's go back a year earlier. I was 11, and the whole story is he had me go with him out to this field, and I got in the back of his pickup truck. He tied a rope around the back tire and then started driving a little diagonally across the field to see how long his property would be, how long a track he could build on this property. And I had no idea at the time what we were doing. So he measured all the distance and thought he had enough room for a drag strip. So we made a commitment. 2 of my uncles had an excavating company, so literally, they had pans and bulldozers and went to work and built the track. And so it opened when I was 12 years old, and that's been quite a few years ago.
Yeah. And then I read you used to watch midgets and USAC champ cars battle at Williams Grove in Pennsylvania?
Well, I saw my first race when I was just a kid at Williams Grove. The Reading Fairgrounds was much closer, and I had an uncle and a cousin that raced modified stock cars, and they'd run Friday and Sunday nights. And my dad took my brother and me out there. We didn't always make both nights, but we didn't usually miss a weekend without seeing either a Friday or a Sunday. And in those days at the Reading Fairgrounds, which is kind of like Terre Haute, a half-mile county fair type speedway, they fill it. I mean, it was a big deal with fan clubs, and it was a lot of fun. I thought that was as good as it got, and I was kind of hoping someday maybe I would be able to do something like that. Once I got involved with drag racing, I still love a good dirt race, but I never felt like I wanted to be involved in anything other than maybe a nitro car.
Yeah, I see the nitro fuel dragster pulled you in for a lifetime, huh?
It sure did, yeah. We had a couple of friends not far from where I lived that bought one of the last Frantic 4 cars, and I traveled with them just as a kid wiping tires. But I learned to build short blocks and heads, and eventually got to make a few runs in that car when I was, I think, 19. And then built my own car with my brother, and we had a third partner, and eventually Kent and I raced, and continued to race through most of the 70s. But I didn't drive anything after 1971. I took over with my dad took over Maple Grove Raceway. And I couldn't travel on weekends when Kent and, we had a list of probably 8 different drivers over the, 5 or 6 years that we raced. And I would go when I could, but more often than not, they would take off and come back Sunday night or Monday morning, overnight, or whenever. And then they'd sleep in and try to, get some strength back. And it would be my job to go to the shop on Monday night and take everything apart, kind of come up with a damage report and look for replacement parts. And usually by Wednesday, we'd start putting things back together. But we loved it. It was great. I mean, shoot, we were just kids. But we raced everywhere from, way north of Quebec City to Amarillo to Hialeah.
Now going back to USAC and midget car, my dad used to take me to watch USACs and midgets and the World of Outlaw cars and sprint cars all the time at the. They used to have a place in Illinois called Santa Fe Speedway. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, all the time he dragged me over there. So he got me into that kind of racing. Then he would take me to US 30 drag strip in Indiana and Great Lakes Drag in Wisconsin. That's how I got in drag racing from him. I was about 4 or 5 years old when I started going to watch drag racing. Now I'm 50, so it's all his fault I got into drag racing.
Well, it takes someone to get you involved. In my case, it just kind of fell in my backyard, and the rest is history. I guess somewhere in everyone's DNA, there's a motorsports switch. And for most of the general population, that switch is never turned on. For people like us, somewhere along the way, it does get turned on, and it becomes a real passion. Once you become involved at the level that we have, it's not like something. I mean, I'll watch a hockey game, maybe toward the Stanley Cup, or I'll watch, another sporting event toward, the end of the season. But to sit and just, watch a game for the sake of watching a game, my life doesn't allow that kind of time very often. But when it came to racing, it became a priority. And as time went on, then of course family splits that priority, and then you build a career. And luckily, my career was also in racing, so my family and my career and my love for racing all sort of went together.
Yeah, and then now I got this podcast show I've been doing for like 3 or 4 years now. Now I get to, promote all you guys. Give you interviews.
Well, we appreciate that. Thank you.
I haven't had like nobody real big on though. Like mostly it's all like nostalgia, funny car drivers and dragster drivers and few alters. All, but I think the biggest guy we had on was Tony Schumacher.
Yep, yeah. That's about as big as it gets in our sport.
Yeah,
might be a guy named Force who's won a few more races, but
right.
Tony's done pretty well for himself.
Yeah, but mostly it's all nostalgia guys I interview.
Yeah, and I've probably raced with most of them. I think that we've got a really good nucleus of nostalgia racing here in the Midwest, and probably the only place, obviously, California is still the home. Not just California, but the whole Western Seaboard, from Bucky and all those people up in Seattle. There's Jim Maroney and quite a few guys in Arizona, and all in between there. I mean, it's fun to go out there to Bakersfield and kind of mix it up with those guys, and most of them have become really good friends. But I miss racing at Cordova. I miss racing at Martin, Michigan. I mean, with the different cars I've driven, we've been to quite a few different tracks, and it's a lot of fun, and there's a lot of respect. A lot of families come to see us race, and it's pretty special. There's other parts in the country where you might have a nostalgia funny car or a front engine top fuel car, and you may not get to race it very often. But I mean, between Cedar Falls and Cordova and Martin, and I think usually there's something going on at Route 66 at least once a year. For most of of the people that we've raced with, if you're out 6 to 8 times a year, I mean, these are career people, business people that can't afford to go racing, like we did back in the old days where you book the cars 2 or 3 times a week. That's fine. And I think you can do that here in the Midwest. And crowds generally respond well. We've raced in front of some full houses, and we've raced some places where maybe we didn't fit the interest level of that particular audience, so we go somewhere else.
So now, during your teenage years, you started working at Maple Grove, huh?
Correct, yes. I was, I think, just short of 15, and it was the year that Maple Grove shut down for a couple of months to extend the track to run a full quarter mile. The first 2 years, there wasn't enough pavement. Even after that experience driving the truck with the rope around the tire, I think my grandfather thought that if he had 3,000 feet, he could build a quarter-mile track. But he forgot about, the cars have to turn, stage, face down track. Even though we didn't do burnouts back then, you'd lose 150 feet or 200 feet. And he didn't realize that how quickly the cars accelerate. And in those days of steel brakes or drum brakes and ribbon parachutes, it took much longer to stop. So he ran a fifth of a mile, which is just a little over 1,000 feet. So I guess maybe he was ahead of his time. But in '64, the track reopened long enough for the current configuration of quarter-mile racing. And ironically, the opening date in 1964 was April 26, 426, the same date as Chrysler released the 426 Hemi.
Wow.
Point of trivia. So anyway, yeah, that's where I spent most of my time. And toward the end of the first full year of quarter-mile racing, he had 2 top fuel cars, Bobby Vodnik and George Mann from Philadelphia. And had a couple of thousand people show up, and this announcer got sick. I worked in the concession stand, but I heard my name in the PA system, and I walked up to the tower, and here was a very quiet German man who I respected immensely, and he just handed me a microphone and said, "I need you to announce." And he did an about-face, walked down the stairs and back to whatever else he was doing, and I stared at this chrome thing in my hand, and I mean, I was just as shy a kid as you'd ever meet, and I was more afraid that day than probably any day until my first skydive or something. It was just a frightening experience, but one that once I survived the day and realized I still had a pulse and people still would kind of talk to me, I ended up taking some public speaking courses, and it was a great opportunity for me to be involved more than just as a fan. I was the first one to know when somebody set a track record, or in some cases a national record. And it became really, it was fun for me to do my homework and then help to tell the story. So I've gotten a little bit more comfortable with the microphone after all these years, but that's the day it started. That's where, I mean, I did a lot of other things around the track, but announcing at the races was, I think, what I did most of. And that also gave me the opportunity, even though, the people might have been 100 yards away from where I was talking, you sort of still draw feedback from people and you interact with people, which helps you then, I guess I was just short of 15 when that happened, and about 6 years later, I think, is when my dad suggested that we approach the family. My grandfather had, by that time, passed away, but the rest of the family owned the track, had leased the track. The lease expired, and the opportunity existed for us to make a pitch to manage Maple Grove. So I had a pretty good understanding of how to construct the events, how to conduct the events. And there were a lot of things I didn't have a clue how to build an advertising budget and all those things, but they accepted, and son of a gun, we went to work, and that's really launched my career.
That's when you became the track manager.
1971. Yes.
And before that, you were driving the dragster with your brother, right? Then you went to track manager.
Well, I was making license runs. To say that I was a top fuel driver would be a little bit of an exaggeration. I was a partner in a car. I drove the push truck for Sarge Arciero and for Dave Robinson, and then had a chance to make a couple runs, which gave me the incentive to partner with my brother, and then we had a third partner. We bought out fairly quickly, so the intent at the end of 1970 was to finish licensing and then start racing in 1971. And it was so late in the year that, we made a couple squirts, and, we hadn't even had a chance to paint the car or chrome anything, but we didn't want to miss the opportunity, so we took it to the racetrack. And, in those days, keep in mind, I'm 20 years old or just barely 21, and when they push you and you let the clutch out and build fuel pressure and hit the switch and it actually starts, it's like a minor miracle. So we conquered that, knew we had a car that we could race, but then my father said, we ought to manage the racetrack. And it took me a while, probably 6 weeks before I realized that this is an opportunity that isn't going to come along again for a long time. And I think looking back on it, I didn't want to drive that car as much as I was so fascinated with being a top fuel driver that I wanted to be a driver. When I actually let the clutch out, I wanted to go fast. But I didn't have anyone around me like a Frank Hawley or anyone close enough that could kind of coach me through my licensing, plus the fact that it was the first engine that I had built completely, the first car, the first clutch. So it was pretty foreign. And then once I agreed with my father that it made sense for us to take over the business, we hired drivers, and the first run that our hired driver made wasn't any faster than mine, but I realized all it was doing was slipping the clutch, so we put some counterweight on it, made a few other changes, and picked up from 180-something to 204, I think, on the next run. And I realized how much I enjoyed tuning the car and building the engines and kind of all the time taking raw pipe and building a car and then assembling the engine and seeing it all come together, come to life. And then the first time we got a couple of win lights, man, I didn't care if I ever drove again. That was really fun to win some races and to see our drivers excel and to see a team kind of perform where everyone did their part. And I never thought I'd drive a race car again. I never thought I would, and I just really didn't think about it until later in my 50s. So, who knows?
So in 1989, you left Maple Grove to join NHRA as vice president?
That's correct, yes. Yes.
That was the field operations.
Yes.
So you were
Yeah, that meant a move from Pennsylvania to California, yes.
You were overseeing NHRA's 7 divisions and member tracks.
My initial responsibility was the 7 division offices, the national field office where all the licenses are processed, and the national event announcing team. And then as time went on, I took on management, kind of oversight. I supervised the managers that we had in Gainesville. There was Gainesville, Atlanta, Columbus. We bought state capital in Baton Rouge during that time period, plus Bakersfield and Pomona. So, and then one of the first things that I was asked to do was to create a youth and education program, and Dallas Gardner had already assembled a group of educators, and they had kind of a preliminary meeting. So I took over at the second meeting and got to know everybody and assess what they really wanted to accomplish. and we created a program that still exists today called the Youth and Education Services Program. And in those days, we had a full-time staff. We created videos that were available for rental, a no-charge rental, on loan, basically, to anyone, anywhere in the country that wanted to use drag racing as a forum for math studies or geography studies or physics or whatever it might be. We had a pretty good selection of video curricula that was available to the classrooms. And then the last thing that we took on was the Junior Drag Racing League. And by that time it was 95, I think, or toward the end of 94. And we developed some national championship. We did a big national championship at Indy, where the tracks all over the country could send their champions. And that's broken down regionally today. But it was, I think we were up to 50 people or more in my department. I was doing more HR than I was racing. So when the opportunity came to move to Indy and manage IRP, then I was back in the racing business. And it gave me the opportunity to work with NASCAR and USAC and to some extent with the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, in addition to the U.S. Nationals and Super Chevy and Good Guys and the Mopar Nationals. And it was a great time to manage IRP.
So now, Mike, tell me a little bit about Ace Ventures.
That was after IRP. I started my own company and did some consulting work with a couple of tracks, a couple of teams that needed some marketing help. Don Schumacher was my first client. And when he started DSR, he asked me if I was interested in coming to work on a full-time basis, and I wasn't quite ready to do that. I wanted to give my own consulting company a little bit of time. So I then took on a position of executive director with PRO, which put me in touch with all the pro teams, and we even brought in pro stock. So it gave me the opportunity to manage all of the insurance programs we did for all the teams and the drivers. We did marketing kits, and I went on calls with a number of teams that had a great racing program to offer, but maybe didn't have the expertise to make a good boardroom pitch. And all along, Schumacher would needle me about why isn't PRO doing this and why isn't PRO doing that. When he came to town, we'd go to dinner and we stayed fairly close. By the end of '02, I realized that he offered one more time, and like I'd experienced with my father many years previous, a good opportunity only comes along every so often. And I had seen at that point Don's growth with Tony and Whit Bazemore in the Matco funny car, and then Scotty Cannon in an Oakley funny car, and there was discussions with Gary Selzy and Jim Gennard about a second Oakley DSR car. And I thought, wow, at the rate this thing is growing, I need to be a part of it. So I made the commitment to Don the end of '02, and I've been along for the ride ever since. It's been an amazing journey. So that's been the most, not only the most recent, but probably the most challenging and rewarding part of my career is working with DSR during this time that we've won 300 races and something, I don't know, 18 championships or 17, or whatever our current number is.
So now you also rejoined your family's racetrack operations?
Yeah, I lost a couple of uncles, opened up a couple seats at the boardroom, so I rejoined the board, probably 16, 17 years ago. And then I was, until December, I had been the president, but that sort of implies that I'm in charge of everything. But it was really, I ran the board meetings. I made a lot of decisions when it came to hiring people and approving budgets and things like that. But day to day, I've always been careful to manage my time where I couldn't, erode my commitment to Don or my time with DSR. But on my vacation days, and occasionally on a weekend, I'd slip back there, and Don was pretty much aware. Don's really been supportive, but in fairness, I finally got to the point where there's a fair number of new people back there that need more day-to-day support. My brother is now president of Maple Grove. I've stayed on the board, and he and I talk quite a bit. I probably have a little bigger Rolodex than Kent does, so he'll call me for contacts and ideas. But it's his position to handle the scheduling and approve the budgets and the people and so forth. And I think I can breathe a little better. I mean, it was just, I take my responsibilities pretty seriously. And when I felt that I wasn't able to deliver to the extent that I'd like to, it made sense to take a little step back. My brother has always been involved back there, but this gives him an opportunity to take leadership, and he's very capable. So that's my current status at Maple Grove.
Yeah, your main focus is the Don Schumacher racing right now.
You got it. Yeah, that gets 100%, and if I can squeeze out 105, that extra 5%, and I shouldn't put it into proportion like that, but I still love Maple Grove. It's part of my DNA. It's part of my history and my family. So hopefully, and I'll get back there. I'm going to go MC their banquet in, a week from Saturday. So I still love the place, and Maple Grove is kind of like a Rockford or a Union Grove, where there's an old guard. There's a group of families there that have been supporting Maple Grove for generations, and I love those people.
So now you still continue to race and select nostalgia drag racing events?
Yeah, it was ironic. I had an opportunity to do a skydive. My wife is sitting close by. I'm going to tell a story. We were driving by and saw a billboard here in Indy that said it was 1-800-SKYDIVE. And we had gotten to know each other. We'd known each other for a few years, and we're still dating. And I said to her, someday I'm going to say I've done that. My words exactly. She hears me say I really want to do that, buys me a gift certificate. So we ended up doing it together and had a great time. And then my daughter in California, and I have two daughters, one in the San Diego area and one here in Indy. My daughter in California is a little bit more outgoing, a little more of it adventurous. And she said, Dad, I want to come back. I want to jump with you. I've always wanted to do that. So I put a group of 10 together, and in Greensburg, Indiana, we all were going to go skydiving. And half the people were from DSR, and then Jen and a group of us from my family. So we had some bad weather. They got to jump. I didn't. I did a jump with the Golden Knights, but ultimately we did get to jump together. And then I thought, what a neat situation that was for my two daughters who live all these states apart, and for me to do something that would, be kind of a family challenge. So a couple of years later, I bought drag racing school packages from Frank Hawley, and of course by now Jack Beckman's driving for DSR. So we all went to Pomona, and we really enjoyed that. But I stayed long enough to get my license. It was the first time that I actually finished NHRA licensing. I'd had an IHRA license for some years. But so here we are. It's 2007. After all these years, I finally have a license. And then a friend of mine, Joel Grusin, who's got a blown alcohol Fiat, said, well, I'm going to test my car the week before the March meet. Why don't you come up and upgrade your license? So I did, and that went really well. And so I'm pushing 190 miles an hour, and I've never gone 200. And I sat on that for a year, and then finally went to Frank Hawley in Gainesville and got my alcohol license. And I thought, okay, I've achieved my goal. I've gone 230 miles an hour. I can at least someday retire and say I did it. But on my way out of the door, when Frank signed my license, he said, "By the way, you did a really good job. And if you ever get a chance to race one of these cars in competition, you'll do just fine. You'll feel that those cars are going to be faster than the 590s you ran here, but you're ready for it. So good luck." Those words kind of served as a challenge. And the next stop, Tom Conway had been a friend for years, and I knew that you could rent his car and he would tune your car. And I thought, well, I'm going to give this a shot. And it wasn't cheap. Tom's cars are first-rate cars, and so I made a deal, and we went to Reading and went to the final round. And I thought, holy cow, look at what I've been missing all these years by not actually being in the car. And I was pretty hooked by it. And out of balanced budgets and other priorities, so I'd only race a few times. And then Justin Grant, with Don's permission, brought back the Wonder Wagon funny car. And Joe Haas drove it most of the time. And Don said, if you ever want to drive a funny car, I know a guy that can give you a pretty good ride. And that's how I got to meet Justin. We went to Bowling Green, and I licensed in his funny car. And then I would drive it off and on. Joe did most of the driving, but I'd run a couple times a year. And eventually Joe moved on, and Justin knew that if I was going to be his driver, we couldn't schedule anything. If I was in Denver or Sonoma or Seattle, we'd have to schedule around NHRA. And ironically, he would find another driver. If he really saw something close to home, he went to Paducah, Kentucky, and had Dominic Lagana fill in for me, which is, here's a guy who's gone 338 miles an hour by now, but he was just on his way up, and he drove the car at one or two races. But as time went on, I got to meet some great people and drive some great cars and have some really nice experiences. And I've never hit anything other than a couple of cones at the March meet. But given the opportunity, I wish I could go back and start it all over and drive every week, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday every weekend. But I'm also realistic to know that my dad probably saved me from getting hurt back in the days that I built my first car and was still trying to license it and do it all myself. I wasn't ready to go be a top fuel racer at that point. But I really enjoyed what I've been able to do in my 50s and 60s. I may not get to race again, and that's okay. I'm looking at a trophy from Bakersfield that means the world to me. I'm looking at a picture of my wife and a whole group of people, Paul Smith and Henry Gutierrez, good people standing behind the starting line, all being cheerleaders. And that to me was the pinnacle. It was probably my best day ever at a drag strip, was winning Bakersfield, and it was 2012. So my driving isn't just something that I've done with the hope that someday I could go 300 and then 320. It really helps me at DSR, and I've changed my whole outlook where I've always relied on the crew chiefs to tell me what's going on with the car. What are you going to do, and what's the car going to run? And we all take the driver's role somewhat for granted. They expect, I don't care who the crew chief is. If Mike Nev's got a 375 tune-up in Tony Schumacher's car, he assumes that Tony's going to run 375. And our drivers are all experienced and all top of their game drivers, and they generally deliver whatever the crew chief can dial into the car. I look at it differently now because I know inside that car is a driver with a beating heart who's hot, sweaty, nervous, part of a team. You draw a lot of confidence when you're part of a team and your car is performing well on a consistent basis. And you also are a little bit apprehensive, not about your safety, but about If you've had tire shake 2 out of 3 runs, and you're up against a Steve Torrance or a Robert Height, you don't quite have that confidence that the car's going to go A to B. It makes it a little bit more difficult to cut a good light and be totally prepared to go turn on a wind light. So all these things just kind of went over my head for a lot of years. I can now understand what drivers are thinking, what they're trying to overcome. I understand what it's like to drive when you don't feel 100%, but you don't get any points unless you're the person in the car with your number on the side of it. You get the points. So it's now up to you, even if you don't feel well, to deliver a quality performance for the other, 8 or 10 guys on your team. And a team owner named Mr. Schumacher, who happens to have pretty high expectations. So my driving experience helps me more understand that aspect of the sport, maybe more than any aspirations of trying to do more myself or go faster or anything like that.
Right. So do you think you'll do any more driving before your career is over?
That's a good question. I probably, I wouldn't rule anything out, but probably not. I think I've had my fun. I've got my priorities with family, with DSR, with Maple Grove. I mean, I'll go. It's tough to go to Bakersfield and not be in the car. So I offered last year to announce, and Bob Beck, who does a good job out there, had surgery shortly before the reunion. So it was probably the first race that I announced, and I didn't do the Top Fuel cars and funny cars, but I did the Pro Mod cars and pretty much whatever they threw at me. And I had a blast. I really enjoyed it. It's the first race I've announced for years. So it was better than being a spectator. Not that there's anything wrong with being a spectator, but I've just been so used to being involved after all these years. So I may announce some more races, and there's probably a better chance that I'll announce something than get back in a car. But we'll see. Like I say, I won't rule anything out. And if I had the opportunity to drive something tomorrow and everything lined up right, I'd be really excited about it. We'll see.
Yeah, it would be neat if one day you could go to Cordova and drive a car at the World Series of drag racing over there.
Well, I've done a couple there with the Stardust car. We qualified really well with the Brand X car there in 2012. And I didn't start driving for Hendry and Paul Smith until June of that year. And so we did a race the end of June in Reading. And I didn't get to drive the car again until Cordova. But we ran some fairly solid 590s. I think 591, which at that time was my best. No, I take that back. I had run quicker. But anyway, I ran some 590s at Cordova. And then we made a couple test runs in Dallas and ran 580s. And that told us the direction to go. And when we got to Bakersfield, we ended up running some 570s, and we won that race. So Cordova was a big factor for me, even though we shook the tires. And I did a wheel stand beside Mark White, who was the low qualifier, and so wasn't much chance of beating him with my front wheels in the air and the car drifting a little bit to the right. So that was somewhat disappointing. I love Cordova, and I love what they've done since they brought it back and repaved. And I mean, you can now take pretty much whatever car you have and run national event caliber performances. We were able to run pretty flat out with the nostalgia cars, but Bruce Litton and Tommy Johnson and Creasy and Wilkerson and Cruz and the big show pros would really have to dial it back over there. Not anymore. You can go over there and you could probably go over there and test and learn something for your next national event. I love it over there. I love the people over there. I mean, it's a group of people that may only see nitro cars unless they drive a couple hours. It's probably the only place they see nitro cars, and they really have an appreciation for not just the nostalgia cars, but the fuel altered, the front engine cars, the big show cars. It's just a beautiful environment.
Yeah, they got a big event going on this year over there with the front engine dragsters. Like I think eight or nine front engine dragsters are running. I forgot what the date is, but Jim Young booked that event over there.
Okay. Well, Jimmy's a good friend.
Yeah. Then they got
Jimmy's a good friend.
They also got Rex Stevens is bringing his roadster over there for that event.
Yeah, we sell fuel to all those guys, and Rex brought his car to our open house last year, and it's probably the best looking nostalgia car ever built, in my opinion. That was the color of my old Top Fuel cars back in the day, so I'm partial to the color, but what he's done with it is just spectacular. He's a good guy. I met Jimmy when Jimmy was a kid, and was actually at a race in Maple Grove of all places, and a bunch of Midwest cars were booked in that a nostalgia race back there, and they probably have 50% nitro, and they're running 650 and 660, and here comes this little small block blown nitro car. I don't even know if it had paint on it, and ran 595. And he had it really tuned up for the second run, but Maple Grove gets tricky when it gets dark. And if you're a little timid, you're going to shake, and it shook. But I've stayed in touch with him all these years. I've watched him race, and I'm really impressed with the job he's done. And Joey Hawes is going to be driving the McLean car that's based in Delaware, and Jimmy had driven that car at Bakersfield once or twice. So Joey's ready to take that step up. You know, he's driven Tom Motrey's car and licensed. Most of his experience is on alcohol, but he buckled me in. I don't know, most of the times that I drove the Wonder Wagon and then the Stardust car. And my fastest run was actually in Tom Motrey's car at Martin. We went almost 279, and Joey buckled me in, and he was the first to get to the other end and gave me the time slip in Martin. So I'd love to be there, you know, when he makes his first 5-second runs in a Top Fuel car, and first time he goes 250, and I mean, he'll be in a good car, and he'll be competitive, and be fun to watch.
Yeah, I love watching Motrey's Jurassic Plastic Fuel Altered.
Well, the best seat in the house is in it. That was the nicest car I think I've ever driven in terms of, I mean, you've got a great vision. It didn't shake. It didn't move around. I mean, it's got a lot of wings on it, so there's a fair amount of downforce. And I didn't know what to expect. I mean, those were the only 2 runs I ever made in a fuel altered. But the first run, I only went to 1,000 feet just to be comfortable. And then I sort of kicked myself for shutting it off because Tom didn't tell me to do that. I just thought, well, I'm going to go to 1,000 feet, make sure that we put on a good show. And John Lawson was in the other lane, so he took that win light. When we made the second run, it was starting to get a little dewy, and they had run a bunch of bracket race cars. Must have been 60 kids there with junior dragsters. And then the head of staging says, okay, you're next. And I said, are you going to do any track prep? Nope. Well, Tom pulled a little counterweight off it because we weren't sure about the starting line. It went 538 at 278.86. And the second half, it went from 220. I mean, that's an almost 60 mile an hour increase. Now, it went from 216 to 279, almost 279. And that was something I hadn't experienced as a car that pulled that hard on the second half of the run. And Martin's beautiful, great track, a little short, and maybe a little dark down there, but it was an incredible ride, and I mean, I'd give anything to go do that again. And the way Tom tunes his car, he puts an RPM limiter in it for the last second or two, just to keep the RPMs under control. It gives him longevity of parts. And he normally runs 260 to 265. But he changed his tune up a little bit, and I think we surprised him. I don't know that he was ready for us to go 278. So if I had a chance to go make one more run, it would be in that car on that day.